All right, thank you. Quick show of hands. How many of you have kids 10 years or older? Okay, well, at some stage you've had the conversation about the box of toys in the basement. It's about the same level of maturity that you have to deal with in some of these challenges. But let me see. Click. There we go. So very quickly, just going over what I'll be going through today. Talk about the challenge of reducing your IT. I'm not going to go too much into the benefits. It should be pretty obvious what that is. I'll talk a little bit about the money saves and how we differentiated some of that, but I think it's quite obvious what the benefits are. Talk a little bit about how hard this is. Some people do underestimate it. Others say it's hard, so we won't do it. And then what we did to build and industrialize the decommissioning process. Then what we did to win people over. We all live in an environment where change control rules. So unless someone actually pushes the approval button, you're not getting that server out. So you have to win people over to do that. Then what we did to find servers to kill, and then a little wrap up. So in the challenge, we broke it into 4 segments, not all equal in scope. So operational, how do you do this safely? What can you do to make a repeatable process? Technical, what tools you need to do it? As I mentioned, finance, we're not going to go into too much detail. But then by far the biggest challenge is the human element, the social element. How do you get people on board? How do you get people to help you out? So quickly on the benefits. So we focused, initially we made a mistake of we added up everything where we thought there'd be a save associated with the decommissioning, and we brought that in front of people, and no one believed our numbers. So we went back the following year using only what I have on the left-hand side there, the hard dollars. Hard dollars being maintenance and licensing. These are, you do this, you get this stuff out the door, you will stop paying these invoices will get smaller, that was real money, and then people began to pay attention at that sort of sea level. Next was power, and power is obviously, you know, when you start decommissioning thousands of servers, you are going to save a lot of money on power. But if you're doing this in an active data center, stuff is coming in as you're taking these things out, and so it's not necessarily going to, it's a cost avoid, and cost avoids, you know, get you nice comments in your end-of-year appraisal, but they don't get projects approved. And then in the intangibles on the right-hand side, these were actually important in getting people on board onto the program. So simplicity, stabilizing the environment, reducing risk, all of these things people bought into after some time, after we started having some successes along the way. So I'm not going to go through everything on this list, but every line that's in one of those 4 boxes is a group that you have to talk to potentially to pull out a server. So we've seen that 12 or sometimes up to 16 change tickets need to be opened up to kill one server, depending on how complex its footprint is. So initially when we started the program, we just started putting together a script which would take the 16, if you're going to get rid of server X, it would take the 16 tickets that you would build and it would spit them out. And it kind of created chaos, and I'll get into a little bit about what we did to remediate that. So the evolution of our decommissioning process. Like many people, we had no unified cross-group decommissioning process. I think a lot of organizations in speaking to them, they have an installation process, but no one actually goes the next mile and comes up with a decommissioning process. So it had to have been 30 people into a virtual room. We had all the disciplines mentioned in the previous section, and we hammered it out until we ended up with a flow diagram of what we thought it took to pull servers out of the data center. We then took that flow and automated it. We used orchestration software to kick off tickets in the right order. So in a simple example, a database, if the server being decommissioned has a database, the automation software says, okay, there's a database here, I will open up a ticket to the database team. It will then watch that ticket until it's closed. If it's closed with a successful closure code, it will then open up a ticket to the storage team. Same process again. When they're finished, it will then open up a ticket to the server team, and so on. So this took out the sort of chaos that I'd mentioned earlier of ticket spam. We then stuck that behind a pretty user interface, just a web portal where users could go, right-click, and decom, and it took all the paperwork away from them. We then customized that to make it global, as we had to deal with the fact that processes and procedures were sort of different in different locations around the globe, and we maintain it on an ongoing basis as we go forward. So at a high level, the process flow, users initiate tickets, often after we arm twist them and point out where the corpses are. Goes through an approval phase, then pre-processing, and then we go into a 3-week process in the data center itself. The first week is inventory. We make sure that we know where the thing is. If the DSIM location is correct. The second week is a shutdown. The automated process that I mentioned earlier on, when all of the tickets north of that point in the process are approved, it logs in and it shuts the server down. DCOps comes along, pulls out the plug, and then 1 week later we do the active unrack, and then after that we have housekeeping where we pull it out of DNS and pull it into our storage area where we keep it for a month and then send it off to meet its maker. So what we do to actually get through and find candidates to clean up. When we started this program, a lot of people thought it was a virtualization program, and they would say, okay, you can get rid of that, but virtualize it. So we resisted that. We don't want to create a sprawl problem in a different area. So we came up with this sort of tagline of elimination, consolidation, virtualization, and validation. So if we can kill it outright first, we will. If not, if it can be consolidated onto another operating system, we will do that. Then if that's not an option, we will look to virtualize. And if virtualization doesn't work, then we sort of validate that it's got a good workload on it, and we leave it alone. A lot of phrases are used. We've actually gone to the effort of classifying it a little bit more, and the reason why we've done that is because for each of these tags here, there's a sort of a different process that we use. So we've defined them. So zombie servers are ones that are in the data center, in the rack, but they're no longer in the namespace. They're no longer in DNS. You can't see them on the network, and they will sit there until you decommission that data center unless you actively go after them. And the work for that is sometimes a rack-by-rack visit, where you do a differentiation between the online network view and the DSIM view. Orphan servers, special case. They're online, they're on the network, they have no owners. So at the beginning of the process, we went to the CIO, got permission on the DCOps side to permission ourselves as proxy owners for those, so that we're able to open up the tickets and get the process going. We do make efforts to find out who owns them, and there have been occasions where we have been able to find that person, we have shut something down, and the tree did fall in the forest and someone noticed. But thus far, they take the beating, not me, which is important. Because it's everyone's responsibility to map what they use, and if they haven't, then sort of shame on them. Abandoned servers are owned, but they're not being, there's no workload on them. So you go to people, you say, look, I found the server, you own it, it looks to be doing absolutely nothing, and hopefully you get them to click approve. Underutilized servers are a little more challenging. We define these as average CPU utilization of less than 2%. So they're doing something, and we're looking with those to get that workload off so that we can free up the system. And then the last one, the hardest one, different color because we've only really started looking at this, are badly used servers. So there is a workload, the lights are on, something's happening, but the actual workload itself is useless. So it might be an abandoned batch or whatever, and that we're coming at through the application side. So we're working with the application teams, and typically we're finding these servers through application decoms. These are attributes that we assign to every server so that we're speaking from a common lexicon, that our customers know that this is the information available to them. We stick all this up in what we call the Worldwide Host Report. And the key attributes that we use to find servers to decom are age, and we tag a buy, sell, hold, or cease rating on every server. And the app guys, the build the bank guys, run the bank guys, they know what their servers are in terms of, oh, I have a cease server or I have a sell server. Compute power, we use spec.org for that, so specint, specfloat, as numeric comparisons. So if you think about Moore's law, if you look at an 18-month cycle for the doubling, if you use Moore's law in reverse, then 3 years back from now, the server, the equivalent server is a quarter of the compute power of what you have today. 6 years back, it's 6% of the compute power that you have today. 9 years back, it's 1.5%. So we really sell the story to them that this stuff is useless, and you really have to, it's really beneficial to the organization to get it out. We make it transparent what the wattage is, and then obviously the ownership that we have in CMDB. So it's such a dry and boring topic that we do what we can to spruce it up a little bit. We've hollowed out a once $130,000 14U server, taken the guts out of it, cut a hole in the top, put a garbage pail in there, filled it with soil, and planted a tree in it. And we wheel that around to the cafeteria and places where IT folks congregate, just to let you know how useless these things really are. We have a server rack, again, that we put obsolete hardware into that we show around. Instead of counting the U on the side, we actually count in dollar terms. We assign a very rough dollar value to that server rack on the basis of the value of the cost of that data center, in this case $200 million, divided by 500 server racks that we have there for a cost of about $400,000 each. We then use the eBay buy it now value as an indicative street price for something, and we say, okay, there's a $400,000 server rack that you've got two $550 servers in that have less power than your iPhone. So our job here is to make the story as compelling as possible so that no one can defend it. We nickname servers that we hate. We've got the 10 least wanted list. This particular server, I won't mention the maker, but its nickname, we call it DC Fats. We charge it with crimes of impersonation of a hairdryer without a license. Anything we can do to get people. We bring people into the data center. We do tours to show them this stuff in the real world. So now at this stage, you have everything that you need. You have a safe, repeatable, and reversible decom process. The reversible part is very important. We just weren't getting the numbers that we needed until we proved that because we had documented the whole process, we could reverse it if we needed to. That was key. Once we had that, people signed up. Once we sort of de-risked it, they signed up. And we are now at the point where most of the servers that we're decommissioning, we're not choosing anymore. The app guys are. They're volunteering. They're coming to the well and throwing their stuff in. As I mentioned, we have a simple lexicon to explain what we're doing. We have the dictionary, buy, sell, hold, etc., so that we can talk to people in simple terms, add transparency to how bad some of this rubbish is, and we continually, at every time we can, we continue to market and push the issue. So now at this point, we are ready to choose candidate servers. Like as I said, we get them from the clients. We go after all the zombie servers that we find, all the abandoned servers. We troubleshoot the orphans. We go after those. We've been pretty successful on that. And we're shameless ambulance chasers. We will chase after any initiative, DC migrations, SAN migrations, application migrations, where there is an opportunity to remove tin. And finally, nothing works as good as competition, so we have actually assigned numeric targets per business line. depending on how they've been utilizing their stuff today. So just to sum up, some things that did not work well for us. Relentless arguing with naysayers was a waste of time. Work around them. Eventually they will see others getting on board. We now have a sufficiently good culture in Barclays about decommissioning. Our CEO mentioned it in an example of what the bank was doing to cut cost in an investor's note. So we have this high visibility. The people who just say no, the server huggers, as you might call them, they're no longer quite as defensive as they have been. What I'm describing, or what I've described quickly thus far, has largely been 3 to 4 years in the making. We did start too aggressively at the beginning. We had outages. Every outage, and by that I mean, the definition of an outage being you turn off a server and someone requests that you turn it back on. Every one of those that we had spread around the water cooler conversations very quickly, and so it creates a huge amount of inertia. So I would start slowly, start close to friends and family, where the impact is low to zero if you do make a mistake. Also, interfacing too low down the org chart. A lot of junior guys rate the size of their empire on the number of servers that they think they have in the data center, so they feel kind of threatened by you coming along and trying to squash that. As I mentioned, the assumption this was a virtualization program, that did not work. Giving in to passive aggression. My God, do people not respond when you talk about decommissioning servers. Never decommissioning servers that are conference reboots. So if servers have been up for a year or more, then don't let the decom weekend be the first time that thing gets shut down, or you'll be the one getting the blame for, when things go wrong. Forgetting what you learn along the way. So we did have this. So we were applying programmatic filters to all of the servers that we've out there, what their utilization footprint was like, et cetera. And we were spitting out potential candidates. We were taking those candidates list back to the owners for conversation. And on some occasions, we were getting back rationale that we couldn't sort of programmatically detect, business risk or whatever being too high. But we weren't really noting that. We weren't putting it down anywhere and saying, okay, this is, we should remember that for the next time. What would happen was we would run the process again, we'd go back to the same people, and we'd really tick them off. Server in and server out policy in full data centers, what we affectionately referred to as hostage exchange, was a disaster. It turned all of the junk servers into currency. People held on to them for dear life thinking that they would need servers installed in that full data center at some point, so they wouldn't give anything up. What did work? Most important, we dedicated some resource to this. Not a lot, but we dedicated some. If you were to take away one piece of advice, I would say from this, do that. It doesn't need to be a highly technical person, but it does need to be, the skill sets that you need is someone with dogged determination who will follow up, will come back to people, will keep chasing. As mentioned, repeatable workflow with as much automation as possible to create confidence. I will say that not by design, more by accident, and just the way the schedule worked out. I was looking at a report that we got on Monday, an activity report from the data centers globally, and I noticed that the weekend just gone, that we had decommissioned 503 servers that weekend across 80 or so applications, no issues. So we have a lot of confidence in that process now. People are pretty comfortable with it. Rollback, as I mentioned. Team partnerships. If your SAs and your DC operations team don't have a good relationship, then invest in pizza and beer or something. Oftentimes they're in different buildings, so it can be a challenge, but they need to work very closely together to get the critical mass to get this all working. Metrics visibility, as I said, starting close to home. And keeping the argument simple, as I said, so 2% CPU utilization, there's a lot of things that people can say about utilization. They'll say that's a stupid metric. I've heard every excuse under the sun. And what I say with the 2% number that we use is that we're not trying to say what the utilization is particularly useful or not. We're just trying to detect no utilization, nothing active. It's sort of that, what is the definition of blah, blah? What is the definition of underutilized? I don't know, but I know it when I see it. And that's what we're coming after people there. Buy-in from the C-suite, we got that early on. You have to cover yourself in Kevlar. You'll never get this done from the bottom up. And as I mentioned, the marketing, also sharing of the congratulations. A lot of people outside of the DC and the SA and the infrastructure teams have a lot of work to do to get this done, so they all deserve their moment in the sun. And lastly, I would say that we white glove the process. We try and take every bit of annoyance out of this from the perspective of the end user who has to do this. And that takes some resourcing on our side. And I think that is it. Okay. Questions? Yes, sir. There's a microphone heading your way, I think.
Mike Brazzoni from Camp Marketing. How often do you turn over the stable from the standpoint of reducing server power? And how old are your oldest servers remaining today?
The example we had there, DC FATS, is 13 years old. We might have one or two older than that. We've a number that are hitting double digits. And obviously, if you're hitting double digits, then that's a problem. So what was the first part of the question?
How often do you turn over the whole stable?
We don't have a program to do that yet. But the thing, depending on, it is an interesting question because, what we've seen is this sort of gradual growth. We have, for the first time ever in the last 3 years, we have started seeing, we're coming down the other side now. We're pulling out more than we're putting in each year, so we're actually starting to come down. But if you have 50 or 60,000 servers in your data center, and the vendor useful life is 3 or 4 years, but the practical life in the real world might be 6 years, anything you're keeping beyond that, it's just diminishing return. People really, they get invested in these things. I mean, the lamest excuse I think I've ever heard in all of the servers that we've decommissioned, oh no, you can't decommission that one. We named it after my daughter. So, okay, I'll base my business decision on that. Yes, sir.
Are you able to use any lessons learned from this as a tool for deployment to keep from creating problems for yourselves down the road? Like someone wants to put in a huge server that's going to run at 2%.
Obviously, so supply is the other side of the problem, right? So you're absolutely right. And we do have a number of challenging type committees. But what I will see, we run afoul of what I'll call Visio diagram design quite frequently, because a lot of the times who puts the initiation of hardware into a data center starts with a Visio diagram. Typically, developers will draw a Visio diagram. And they'll show it to me, and it'll look pretty, and it'll have lots of rectangles in it. And their objective is to turn every single rectangle in that diagram into a physical server. That's what they want to do. We obviously don't want to do that. We have learned a lot along the way. So part of what we use to challenge people who want more is we take the sort of 2% utilization numbers, and we say, wait a second, you want more? Look at what your current estate looks like now. Why would you want more? You've got 200 systems over here running at 2% or less. Why on earth do you want more? And that's been pretty successful. And it's not for the faint-hearted, and you have to have a little thick skin because you are going to butt heads with people. They don't want to do this. And at some stage, you have to kind of, stick to your guns and say, okay, you have 200 servers that are running at less than 2% utilization, and you want more. Okay, we need a referee in the room. Let's get your divisional CIO in here, and okay, I don't need it then. Anybody else? Yep.
Did you utilize management bonus incentives to incentivize the various groups who are working on this project to work together, or anyway were monetary incentives involved in this project?
No. No. Simply peer pressure and embarrassment were the primary tools. Okay, I think we are good. All right, thanks a lot, guys.